So welcome everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. We're excited to be able to talk to you guys today about impact measurement, how you can present that within your systems and to the public. My name is Dan Erdley. I'm the Senior Platform Solutions Manager from SmartSimple Software. SmartSimple Software provides Platform 3, which is a really configurable platform solution, which helps organizations achieve their CSR needs and philanthropy needs related to grant making, volunteering, employee giving. And I'm joined today by Jim Starr, CEO and President of America's Charities. Jim, why don't you introduce yourself and let us know a little bit about you and America's Charities.
Fantastic, Dan. Thank you. And good morning and afternoon to everybody. Really pleased to be with you guys to talk about what is a complicated topic about impact and how you measure impact. First, a little bit about America's Charities. Our mission is to inspire employees and organizations to support the causes they care about. So we work directly with companies and nonprofits and are a nonprofit ourselves. And we're really thrilled to be partnering with SmartSimple on the Engage platform. Engage is, we believe, the world's first true end-to-end giving and CSR solution that tells the complete picture of your global impact, all on one platform. So SmartSimple is the technology engine that drives the Engage platform, and America's Charities is engaged in positioning and presenting this to companies that would like to get into the CSR space with employee giving programs, employee volunteering programs, and corporate grants management and philanthropy as well. So we essentially do everything from program design to client support to distributing those funds to charities. And really happy to be here to dive into impact measurement.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So first, for everybody's awareness, a couple of items that you can keep in mind. We are recording today's session, so we'll be able to email that to everybody that attends, as well as be able to post that on each of our sites and YouTube channels and things like that. And we want this conversation to have you involved. So if you have questions, comments, please include those. We have a Q&A section enabled within this Zoom presentation today. So that's the best place we can ask those. The chat works as well. So please go ahead and provide those as we go through our discussion. We'll probably walk through most of the questions at the end, but if we see things and if it's going to make sense in the moment, we'll definitely try and work that into our discussion. So we want to be able to dig in and sort of, we want to make sure that you're understanding where we're headed today. So one of those things is that we are sort of approaching this with the intent that you already know what you want to measure. So you've already sort of defined that as a part of your process. So if you feel like you still need to determine that portion of this discussion of what you need to measure, you can view our fireside chat with David Goodman of Bright Hive, and that's available on both SmartSimple and America's Charities websites. So if that's something of interest to you, we do have some discussions on that we can point you to. So for this webinar, we're going to move from that, what do we measure, to how are we going to measure it and share it. So Jim's going to dive in and tell us a little bit about from that impact and types of impact perspective.
Dan, thanks. Yeah, so I do want to kind of frame out our discussion a little bit on the what topic, just a little bit, because it is rather complicated, and there are a variety of different ways to look at impact. In fact, we asked over 750 companies what they were struggling with when it came to impact measurement. And we got a lot of responses to that question. And we boiled their answers down really into a few buckets that focused on things like how to track and report and communicate impact to stakeholders. Things like, how do we move from measuring activity to actual true outcomes? And how can we best utilize the right measurement, visualization, reporting, and sharing tools? And then probably the most complicated thing, and the one that everybody struggles with, is how do we measure some of the more intangible data and more of the things that are a little bit more squishy and can't really get our arms around in terms of the impact and difference that we in a company or even in a nonprofit are actually making? What kind of difference are we actually having in our communities and society as a whole. So let's first kind of maybe talk a little bit about what are the different ways to look at impact. And so the first and most common and easiest is looking at our outputs or our activity. And this is the most common form of measurement that we see with our clients. This is looking at things like, the level of employee participation, the number of volunteer hours that have been provided, the number of grants and the dollar value of those grants that we've distributed, and the dollars that we've raised through our employees as well as through ourselves for causes. And those are all, nice outputs that are demonstrating the level of activity that you're able to generate. And you can even tie those around to specific areas or causes so that you can even focus that in a little bit more. And Dan, I know you're going to show a little bit about how you can actually do that. Outcomes is much more difficult, not even a little bit more difficult, but much more difficult. And one of the challenges is, how do you associate direct causation with things that are being impacted by a whole host of variables, some within your control, many outside of your control. Layered into that, a bunch of other efforts and organizations that are contributing and playing roles in helping shape some of those outcomes. So we're looking at things like, behavior change, benefit to the community, engaged employees, or even more specific outcomes like student graduation rates or minority home ownership, reduced income inequality, fewer people going hungry, higher levels of employee retention, those types of things. And so we want to really start focusing more of our discussion around impact around those types of outcomes. But you can also look at your outcomes as well as your outputs and activities through another lens, and that is externally. So as a company, what impact are we and our employees having on our community and society as a whole? But you also want to be looking at some of the internal factors as well, and that is the impact that you're having within your own organization. So, Dan, I know that we've got a framework through the Engage platform that allows us to kind of start to associate these, activities and outputs and to some extent outcomes as well in a framework in terms of how organizations are measuring and collecting some of that data.
Absolutely, and we're going to kind of show everybody at least a brief overview of how that can be utilized in a little while. We call that our goals tracking framework within Engage. And what that allows you to do is to track all of that activity that Jim's talking about. So that could be volunteering, employee giving, donations, grant making. It really doesn't matter what you're tracking, but you can relate it back to your goals so that you can then aggregate data of your contributions and then be able to track that against that framework. And so that goals tracking framework is really open-ended. The one that we've sort of adopted as a good example is the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. And that SDG framework is something that the UN has established, and with 2030 targets of the things that they want to see as a global community that we are all working towards to, reduce poverty, to have clean water. There's 17 of these goals and have specified targets. So this is becoming a more and more widely adopted framework, especially in the CSR space, to help align your efforts with sort of a framework such as that, where there's very specific goals and targets that are looking to be met. Some of that is difficult too, as Jim's alluding to, because it's very lofty and big, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But you can also specify what you want to track within that framework. And it doesn't have to be the SDGs, it could be an ESG framework, it could be really any framework that you've identified that you want to use as a model to be able to track your activity against that, and then identify those KPIs, those outcomes and impact measurements that you want to reflect. So we'll be able to go through and walk through some examples of that and how it can be tracked within a system like Engage, so that you can also present that data and that it's not just something that's living within a database and you have no actual use for it from there.
So Dan, maybe we can explore a little bit about how a company can look at their own efforts and their activities and their outputs and even impact within their organization. And so in looking at that level of activity and those outputs and how is that driving impact for their own organization, so that internal view, if you will. And you can easily measure the outputs of dollars raised or hours volunteered in your platform, and kind of look at some of those metrics. But are these things really making a difference with outcomes for an organization like engagement, retention, and recruitment? So at America's Charities, we conduct regular research into this space. In fact, you can look at our snapshot research as a free download at charities.org/trends. And a couple of highlights from that. When we asked corporate leaders in this space how they believe these types of programs impact their level of engagement, 88% said that effective employee engagement programs help attract and retain employees. And 86% said that their own employees, their workforce, want these opportunities to engage in the community. But we also asked those employees themselves, and their feedback mirrors what the corporate leaders said. 70% of them said that they want to work for an employer whose mission and values align with their own. And about that same percentage, 71%, want to work for companies where the culture supports giving and volunteering. So when you're looking at your efforts in this space and giving back to the community, it's important to understand what you're doing within your company and how that is driving these types of factors, but also how you could perhaps look at how they're focused into perhaps either against certain goals or different cause areas, and leveraging a platform that can provide that information to you readily and easily.
Absolutely. And I think even one of the points you're making there in terms of that internal impact, not something we were even thinking about when we were talking about the goals tracking, but that goals tracking structure, which I can show you guys a little bit of, is also something that you can utilize to sort of identify that sort of influence within your organization, so that you can ensure that your goals, the things you're working towards, are in alignment with what your employees are seeking. So that maybe if they're not, then that's something you can shift from a CSR strategy perspective to help improve employee retention and ensure that you as an organization are aligned with their goals as well. So to show you guys a little bit, let's go ahead and share my screen. So when we talk about that goals tracking structure, this is what we mean, and that we've developed a module within the SmartSimple platform and within Engage to track all of that activity against your defined goals, what you're looking to measure against. So again, in our case, what we've utilized is that UN SDG model. And so we have those 17 goals listed here, but again, it's not prescriptive. So you can utilize whatever goals are, important to you as an organization. Maybe you've set specific pillars or tenets of your CSR strategy that you are working towards as an organization. And you can utilize the structure within Engage in order to measure those things. So I know I've worked with some organizations to roll this out with them, and they've added their own goals in addition to the SDGs. So you can even do a blended approach as well. But what you see on the screen here is that we have our listed goals, and then we have each of our different areas of our CSR initiatives, those granting, donations, volunteering, that we're tracking against those specific goals within the system. And you can see here also that we have a strength metric. And so that's what I was just referring to, is that we can identify from a strength perspective what's the highest level of interest from our employee base, based on them getting involved in the system, them interacting with it. They can essentially work through a simple sort of polling mechanism to say, I'm most interested in this goal, I'm less interested in this. These are the most important things to me. And by entering that into the system, then we can roll that up as an organizational level, and that can help drive your CSR strategy, so that if clean water and sanitation is the most important goal to your employees across those that you've defined, then maybe more of your focus from a volunteering perspective, from your granting programs, from employee giving campaigns could be based around those types of causes, so that it helps ensure your employees are more interested in the things that you're presenting as efforts for your CSR strategy. So all of that activity can roll up within the space, and you can present it in a variety of ways. This is sort of a detailed view, but we can also present things with more of a sort of visual heavy manner, showing those icons and the individual images related to those goals. But when you go into an individual goal within the goals tracking module, what you'll be able to see is an overall view of what that goal is about, what you're looking to do within that space. And you can define, roll up all of the activity system-wide, so that if you're managing your volunteering, giving, and corporate giving all in one module, or excuse me, all within one platform and system, then all of that lives in one space, and it's not in different systems that may talk to each other, but they're not fully integrated. Within Engage, it's all within a single solution. So we can then aggregate that data, roll it up to the applicable goal, and then you can see the overall contributions and numbers that you're looking to track against that particular space. Now, what you'll see here, and what we talked about in terms of those outputs earlier, is that a lot of this is dollars and cents. How many hours were served? How many people were involved? How many dollars were donated? Those types of things. Those are kind of baseline. But what we can do is we can take the unique KPIs to each organization, the things that you're looking to measure, so those what's that we were talking about earlier, and we can essentially expand this to include those unique KPIs so that you can measure that data based on the activity that you're tracking in the system. All of that works in an automated fashion, so that, as an example, within the volunteering space, if we look at sort of a volunteer event setup form as we're creating a new event in the system, we can identify the goal that it's going to be aligned with, assign that, and then based on that assignment, when that activity occurs, so that when people register, when they volunteer, when they're serving their hours related to that project or opportunity, all of that will then aggregate up to the appropriate goal, and we can reflect that data in that space. So the goals tracking structure allows you to do all of that measurement. And then we have a variety of other features that we're going to get into in a little bit that help within sort of that external space, things that you're doing outside in the community as well, which I know Jim has some other additional expertise in, and things that we want to discuss within that space.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit more about, and dig into this concept of kind of true societal impact. There really isn't one right way to do that in terms of translating your dollars or your hours volunteered into impact. It does start with having to define and understanding what is it that you actually want to change. Where is the impact that you want to have? You can start with the lofty, but it's important to try to bring some more specificity to it, because it's in those details, in terms of the level of specifics, that you'll be able to get a better handle on how to actually measure the impact that you're having. And from the corporate perspective, it's even a little bit more difficult, because you're even further away from the direct delivery of service and actually having that direct impact. And that's where your nonprofit partners really do come in. We really stress with our own clients and with the space as a whole that, it's important to really work closely with your nonprofit partners. They're the ones that are on the ground, they're delivering the services. They're the ones that have a much more acute feel for the impact and difference that they're making. But I also know, and we've got quite a few nonprofits on the call with us today, it's still an issue that just about every nonprofit is struggling with. How do I translate my level of activity, my level of resource investment into a very broad kind of category around an outcome? And that's because, this concept of societal impact is so overarching. And it's incredibly difficult to associate a causal and in some respects, maybe even a correlative relationship between that specific effort and an outcome. And we could take something like, increased graduation rates. We want to target efforts maybe into underserved communities and increase the graduation rates of that population. And so that's something that's more specific. You've defined it a little bit more, and you're getting closer to be able to look at least an outcome measurement of graduation rates, and hopefully be able to show maybe some of the activity that you've put into that. Maybe it's through scholarship grants, or maybe it's through mentor relationships and hours invested in that, that can lead to those graduation rates. And that's why it's important to work with partners that are directly working in that space. And it's important to find those partners that have been focusing in on this, that can demonstrate some level of direct impact of their efforts. And that way you'll know, or have a better sense of, how your investments of time and resources and dollars are directly tied, or more directly tied, to that measurable impact. And having said that, you'll also, as a company making these investments, are going to be dependent on your partners to help you frame that out as well. And Dan, I believe we're working with a company that really kind of has dove a little bit deeper into this and leveraging the Engage platform to help with that.
Absolutely. Especially within sort of the grant making space, where you are working with those partners, those nonprofit partners, and where you're providing that funding, you have the opportunity to really sort of take reporting, all of that grant reporting, and take in data about what's actually occurring on the ground and how you as an organization are helping achieve those results. So one of those examples, I'll just share my screen again, is again related to that grant making concept, where within an application cycle and then within grant reporting after that grant has been awarded to that nonprofit partner, that's a way for you to be able to measure what's actually resulting from their projects and programs. So one of the clients that we've worked with, we're building with them a unique measurement and metric processing tool within their system to track the things that they want to track specifically. So the example that I have up on the screen is related to sort of the initial application cycle, and when somebody's applying for funding as a part of the program that you're offering. And what you can do is you can include the ability for them to be able to list the outcome metrics that they will be looking to achieve as a result of their specific project. How that can be done within the platform is using what we call an advanced database field. So it's sort of like an Excel-like form within the system where we can build it into any type of structure. So this is sort of a simplistic view, but you can have as many different sort of columns and rows and different sections and calculations. But for this client, instead of leaving it open-ended so that it's all just write-in, and that happens a lot within sort of the philanthropy space, is that you might ask the grantee, what are your expected outcomes and outputs? And then they just tell you from their perspective what those are. And you could still measure it, but it's sort of contained within that specific grant and with that specific organization. What this organization is doing is that they predefined a series of metrics that were important to them based on sort of the industry that they live in. And so for them, it's within the healthcare environment. And so their different series of granting programs are all focused around that. And so what they did is they defined a list of metrics for each of their different granting program areas so that it's dynamic, so that for each type of grant, there's a specific list of available metrics that's going to align with that specific area, and then allows their applicants to then select those that are going to apply to their specific program or project. So based off of that, they'll be able to then define the specific metrics that they expect to be able to address, to be able to measure within their given project. And then they're able to then identify what they expect to hit for each quarter or for each year. And then based on that, we can then include any of the calculations, mathematical formulas, many of the things that you would typically do maybe within an Excel form. All of that can be replicated within the system, but with the value being that we're actually tracking the data and it's stored to the database, so it's reportable. And what this allows us to do is that at the application level, the grantee or the grant seeker is telling us what they expect to hit. That helps you evaluate their program and project and see if it's going to meet your standards, if it's something you want to fund, somebody you want to partner with. But then ultimately, once that grant has become awarded, we can take this structure, those that you have essentially approved as a part of that awarded grant, and then from a grant report perspective, I'll just jump over to a grant report form as an example. That grant report form can include lots of the things you probably already include, things like, narrative questions, maybe certain metrics that you want to ask about and things like that. But you can also use that same database Excel-like form to show that user, that grantee, here is what you said you're going to achieve within each quarter or within each year, whatever that sort of timeline is that you want to measure against. And we can lock everything down that they don't need to edit. So it's, pretty simple, saying, okay, you already told us what you did in quarter one. Now in quarter two, tell us what you actually achieved as it relates to those metrics that you specified compared to what your targets were. And then we can do things like percent to goal, percent variance, and how it's varied from what they expected to hit. That could then enforce that they provide you additional information or input into why it's potentially skewed from what the expectation was. And this is all great and good, and it allows you to identify, is this project on track? Are we looking to achieve what we were intending to and what this organization intended to? But because we've defined the metrics and we've said these are our 15 metrics for this program area and these are 20 for another program area, and they are defined, then what that allows us to do is across all of our grantees, across all of our funding efforts, we can see how many people were served, how many people, how many meals were provided, whatever that metric may be, and we can aggregate that data across all of our efforts rather than an individual effort for a single program and project. And the aggregation is great, but then you also want to be able to report on that and reflect it and build dashboards and things like that. For the client that we're working with right now, building this sort of concept within their system, they are then using the capabilities of the SmartSimple platform to feed that data very seamlessly using a protocol we call OData. It allows them to feed that data into Tableau or any other business intelligence tool. They are already using Tableau, so they are going to be feeding that data into Tableau to do even more advanced data analysis, trends analysis, dashboards for their executive teams, so that on a quarterly basis within their environment, they want to be able to show across their organization, across the nation and the impact that they have, what are they doing, what have they achieved, and being able to reflect that to their executive leadership. So there's a real results that they can show of that, rather than just saying we've given X amount of dollars. They can actually show, well, we've impacted this many lives and here's how. So this type of structure, and it doesn't have to be this exact use case, you can really make it your own. That's the benefit of the configurability of the platform. But this type of use case can show you how you can really take in that data, and as long as it's sort of defined what you want to measure, then you can utilize these types of tools to be able to achieve that.
Dan, that's some really good stuff, and it's providing a lot of that data and information that can tell a story, and that's another important aspect of looking at your impact and how you're measuring that. Is how do you share that? Because it is incredibly important to share that story and that data with your stakeholders, with your own internal audiences, your employees and investors and whoever else, but also externally to your own customers and to the community at large. And so there is tremendous value in storytelling, but it's important how you do that, right? You shouldn't have data without a story, and you shouldn't tell a story that doesn't have data. So no data without stories, no stories without data. In fact, at America's Charities, we prepared a white paper called Exceptional Storytelling Made Easy. Again, that's available for a free download at charities.org/storytelling. And we're actually going to update it and incorporate some of the tools and techniques and displays that we have through the Engage platform as other ways to really kind of demonstrate that story of impact. And so this is about, how do you translate your efforts, your activities, the dollars raised, dollars granted, hours volunteered to those specific outcomes that you and your partners have been able to demonstrate. So let's take, if increasing graduation rates is a focus, you can talk about and show data about how the hours that have been provided by your employees mentoring youth have actually contributed to the increased graduation rates of students that may be being mentored or served by a nonprofit partner that you're working with. Or maybe it's the dollars that your company has raised and granted to an organization that's maybe providing scholarships or tuition assistance to at-risk youth, and that has resulted into a higher percentage of those youth actually going to college. And so that's some of the data that you can then roll into having some of those personal impact stories that help really translate the numbers into an actual personal impact, so that you're conveying a great story with strong data tied to your direct efforts. But you can also start to look at, what are some other creative ways to show your activity and your efforts and your outputs and impact, and show the data in unique ways, like maybe looking at the level of engagement and investment that you're providing into a specific geography. And I know there's some neat tools out there that can actually help with that as well.
Well, lucky for you, Jim, I've got some I can show you. So I did want to mention, and before we get to the example that Jim was referring to there, I did want to mention at least because what I was referring to earlier in terms of feeding that data into a business intelligence tool or BI tool, that's not necessarily a have to. That's just another luxury and something that we want to accommodate with using a platform like Engage. But you also have the ability to create dashboards and charts and presentations of data within your environment, within your version of Engage. So those can be personal dashboards, role-based portals. These types of things can be interactive based on those things you want to toggle off, toggle on, be able to drill down into specific sections of that space, so that maybe you want to see the 3 grants that make up my disaster relief efforts. I can actually click on that and then drill down into those records, and then even navigate directly to a record within the system, so that I can see the data behind it, but also visualize it in a different way. And when we were talking about the goals aspect earlier, you can also take that data from a goals perspective, and you can chart those things as well, so that across your volunteering, your granting value, your donation value, you can own that and then present that on a whole and how your organization is achieving those means. And these things are generated in the system, but you can present them anywhere you want. You can also take them outside the system and present them publicly. And one of those examples, and what we were talking about there, is with geomapping. And so with geomapping, it allows us to present where your activity is occurring. So your granting, where your donations are going, where your volunteer events are being held. Each of those are different opportunities, and you can use geomapping capabilities to really do any of them. And so with geomapping, in this case, this is kind of one of our built-in tools within the SmartSimple platform to be able to utilize an impact map, as we call it. And so you can drill down into specific areas, be able to see high-level details related to a particular project or whatever that data is that you want to show. And you can do things like showing things in relation to different geographic boundaries. So maybe I want to see within, let's say I'm operating in the US, maybe I want to see where those projects are occurring in relation to US congressional districts. And so what you can do is you can include different overlays onto your maps, and then be able to visualize that data in relation to those different geographic boundaries. Maybe you're more on the local level, so maybe you're within a city. Then maybe you want to see it based on the city neighborhoods or the wards within that environment, whatever that different structure may be. And this is something that you can utilize at a global level or at any different level. And these types of overlays are widely available. It's using a KML file, which is the common approach within sort of the Google Maps environment. And so using this impact map, this is a way that you can show where those things are occurring, but also then visualize it and display it for a variety of audiences. So that could be based on not only your internal stakeholders, your executive leadership or whoever it may be, but also you can present them publicly. So we have another map example. Actually, I think one of the individuals we worked with from this organization is on the call today. And so this was something that we custom built for one of our clients in Denmark to show where their volunteer projects were occurring globally. And as you can see, they're very in line with that SDG model, those Sustainable Development Goals. So you'll see references to those and filters based off of that, so that they really wanted to be able to track all of that activity and take advantage of those capabilities within the Engage platform. And so for their space, you can see it really is branded and aligned with their capabilities, with their focus areas. Again, you can drill down into specific areas, select specific projects to be able to see the details related to that, show those KPIs in terms of how many people volunteered, how many hours were served, how many dollars were raised as a part of a particular project. And so whatever those unique KPIs are and whatever data you want to present, geomapping or impact maps allows you to be able to present that. So Jesper actually is happy to have a shout out. So Jesper is on the call from Grundfos. Grundfos is a global organization that works in many things, but also is really focused on sort of water pump technology and things like that. And so one of their key KPIs and unique things that they wanted to be able to track is related to clean water and cubic meters of clean water that are provided as a part of their projects and their volunteering efforts globally. And so as you can see within their unique KPIs that they're tracking, they are tracking that data related to their efforts and then rolling that up and then tracking it against the applicable SDGs so that they can show and report on what their actual efforts are within that space. So I was really happy to be able to partner with Jesper. I'm glad he's on the call. I'm glad he's happy to have a shout out. You know, impact maps are a great way that you can utilize the different feature sets within Engage to be able to sort of reflect what your efforts are and do it in a visual appeal. And you, like I said, can present this internally, or you can also put it on your public websites. We have a variety of different clients that have done that, that have done these types of mapping or reporting, and then they show that data on their public website, make it interactive so people can interact with it. Even though it's being generated out of the platform, it doesn't mean it has to live there. It's something that you can really put out there and have people interact with from a public perspective. And then that helps inform them, you know, what you as an organization are doing, where your efforts are aligned and what you really care about. And so these are ways that you can really show that from a storytelling perspective, like Jim was mentioning.
So, Dan, we've talked quite a bit about types of inputs versus outputs, looking things externally versus internally, how to visualize the data, how to share your story. So we've covered some ground, you know, talked about a variety of different things, but I think now is maybe a good opportunity to address some of the questions that have been raised and see if there are other questions that people want to submit via the Q&A tab or perhaps even in the chat. And Dan, I do have one for you.
Sure.
Right off the bat. And that question is, how does Engage sit as a module or even an API within their instance of SmartSimple so that they can minimize redundant data entry?
Got it. Okay. I'll try and tackle that. So, and kind of explain. The SmartSimple platform in its nature is a business process automation tool. So we really don't come after things from a prescriptive model. We don't tell you how you have to work. We're really giving you a tool that can really track and automate any type of business process. We've just had a lot of success in working within sort of the philanthropy space, within the CSR, corporate social responsibility environments. So tracking that grant making, volunteering, employee giving. So you don't have to do all of those or any of those. You can use the platform to track your efforts, you know, the things that you want to track and the processes you want to automate within your organization. So for our examples and where we see a lot of value within Engage is that you can do all of those within a single solution. And so something that really differentiates the Engage platform from others in that space is that we are not coming after it from 3 different angles. So we're not giving you 3 different solutions that are built to the average to say, you know, this is what we have built for employee giving, this is what we built for volunteering, and this is what we've built for grant making. And so all of those are built as modules on one platform. And so that really means that they are inherently integrated. So there's no integration after the fact that we have to build between these three different solutions. So we know we can report on any of the data that's all associated across the platform and across your database, so that it's one database you can report on. And in terms of integration and kind of speaking to that a little bit, the term I always use is we're integration agnostic. So as long as other systems can be integrated with, we have a variety of capabilities, from open APIs, web service calls, file-mediated transfers, whatever the technology requirements are in terms of that integration component. We can help develop those integrations with your other systems, so that if you need to take data in from your HR systems, or be able to push data out to an accounts payable system, or whatever it may be, all of those can be developed so that, like you said, if there's somewhere you're already presenting that data or recording that data, then we don't want you to have to do that multiple ways. We can integrate those systems and be able to pull that in or push that out accordingly.
Dan, thank you.
Absolutely.
I see we've got another question. Have you found that wanting to measure outcome impact instead of output has either motivated or demotivated people? Does this deeper level of reporting inspire people or discourage them? I'll take a first crack at that, Dan, and if you want to pipe in, that'd be great. So we haven't at America's Charities, we haven't directly measured that question. And so I can't point to any specific data set or number that says, yes, you'll have a higher level of engagement or motivation by being able to report on outcomes. However, we do know, and you can see this in how people are donating, that individuals seem to be much more attuned to wanting to know how their specific level of effort, be it $1 donated or an hour volunteer, is having a direct impact. And anecdotally, you could look at things like, the advent of, GoFundMes, right? Where there's a specific project that's been established and it's generating dollars and awareness. That's because people feel that their contribution is going to a direct, specific kind of outcome, if you will, via that vehicle. And so taking that lesson learned, if you will, and bringing it into, the corporate employee giving and volunteering and grant space, you can do things like what you just showed with Grundfos and measuring, cubic meters of clean water, a very specific, tangible kind of outcome, and they're tracking to that. And so their employees know that when they're making their own investment of their own dollars or their own time into that effort, they know that they can see the impact that they're having through that vehicle. And I would highly suspect that is much more motivating than knowing that we donated $100,000 or 100,000 hours of volunteering time. Knowing that that level of investment actually is directly translatable to this volume of clean water is much more highly motivating.
Yeah, I would say, I'm certainly the technology expert on this discussion, and Jim's more that impact measurement expert here. But I will say I'm very active within this space so that we can be a leader in providing technology efforts related to it. And so I've attended, I remember a summit related to employee engagement I attended a couple of years ago. And Aon Hewitt gave a really fascinating presentation on all of the HR data that they tracked and that they report on, and the studies they've done within this space. And so that, being able to track and identify, what inspires people, what, increasing employee retention rates related to your employee engagement efforts. And that goes into volunteering and employee giving, but they're not necessarily one and the same. And so one of the things that we've talked about and many people are aware of is that really it is a significant percentage of people that are inspired to work for organizations where the organization's goals and values align with their own. And so I think, and it goes across the board. I think that was one of the fascinating things from this summit and from that talk was related to that everybody has this assumption that it's millennials, that, they really care about that their goals are aligned with their organizations. But really from their studies, it was across the board, even percentage across every single generation. So really put that myth to bed. So I think when you are able to tell the stories, if you are able to say exactly what you are doing from a contribution standpoint and from certain outcomes that are occurring, and not just, like you said, dollars and cents, which is never really all that inspirational to somebody. I think it would be rare that you would, discourage somebody based on your efforts. It's going to be more than likely that those things are going to encourage people and inspire people to do more. And I think where there is maybe that small element of risk that you might be alluding to there, I think that's where sort of polling and surveying your employees where you can, utilizing tools like we talked about earlier in the system, or using just a traditional survey mechanism for your employees and their happiness within the organization. If you can engage them and understand what their values are, what they're most inspired to do from a CSR perspective, from a corporate social responsibility perspective, then that can help ensure that you are aligning your CSR initiatives to be in line with your employees' passions and values, and that there isn't a disjointed effort there. Because if there is, and you learn about that, then that gives you the opportunity to realign your strategy and help ensure that you're not, losing people because they feel like the organization's just not in line with what I value. So those types of mechanisms, whether it's utilizing a platform like Engage or a typical survey, I think there's a lot of opportunity to be able to ensure that your efforts are aligned with your employees' passions as well.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other facet of that also is, and this is one of the things that we do with our own clients, and also working with the nonprofits that we work with also, is we work with our nonprofits to strongly encourage them and even help them develop what we call either dollar buy statements, fairly common, out in the space, or impact statements, where a client can share with their employees, for every $100 donated, we're able to provide, X number of meals, or we're able to save X number of animals, or whatever those kinds of direct correlations are between a level of investment and a particular outcome. Those are important things to have at your disposal. So from the nonprofit perspective, it's figuring out, how do I make that translation? And then from the corporate perspective, it's making sure I've got those types of things at my disposal that I can use as part of our own storytelling and our own communication to our employees.
Absolutely. So Claudine, do we have any other questions that may have come up?
Hey, check that for you quickly. Give me a second.
Gonna start playing some music.
Yeah, maybe the Jeopardy music, maybe.
I do have one over here. How do you manage the tension between setting the strategic outcomes desired and the effort burden to collect and verify the data? Does that make sense?
Say that one more time.
How do you manage the tension between setting strategic outcomes desired versus the effort burden to collect and verify the data?
Got it.
So this is where your relationships with the nonprofit community will come into play. And hopefully you'll find some partners that have taken some effort, to define their own activity and impact that they're having, that you can align with your own strategic goals that you have. But then from the nonprofit perspective, it's also a question coming from them as well. What's the level of effort I need to put into actually being able to demonstrate this? And so there's no one right answer to that, other than you need to make some effort to be able to translate what you're doing and the value and the impact that it's producing. And you'll find that more people will connect and engage to that. And then it's just a matter of, how do you translate that into how you collect it? And, if you've got the right tool, it should be fairly straightforward and easy, or easier, and again, leveraging what the system can collect from your own level of activity, as well as an easy vehicle for your partners to provide data back into you, as Dan showed in a couple of instances of what that looks like.
Yeah, I think, and we get this, and I've seen this so many times with organizations that we've worked with, and I've been a part of those conversations many times of wanting to track those outcomes and how do we get there. And when we have those conversations, lots of times we never get there. A lot of it ends many times in that earlier conversation of what do we want to measure. And so I think there's a lot of effort and work that has to go into that portion and the things that you care about and those KPIs and indicators and metrics that you want to measure based on where your efforts are aligned, based on what your strategic goals are. And so I think if you can get over that hump, the actual mechanism and capability to take in that data and report on it is, again, going back to the tool, like you said, Jim, is so that if you don't have a tool to do that, then that's an opportunity for you to be able to, speak with us or others that, provide those types of solutions. But the actual measurement aspect of things, we can do that. It's a matter of the framework and the metrics and the things that you want to be able to measure. That's where I feel like there's so many times where it never gets over that hump. And so we never get to the point where we're able to actually get into the actual mechanism of it and then being able to report on it. Because once we take the data in, reporting on it's really easy. It's really all the effort, in my opinion, is in that earlier phase of defining that framework and defining those metrics that you want to key in on.
Thank you, Dan. I have a follow-up question on the topic earlier about SmartSimple, Engage being added as an additional module or API. We do have a lot of attendees we do have a lot of people in the audience that are not in the CSR space, mostly maybe, let's say, in the philanthropy space or in the research granting space. If they choose to do some outcome and impact measurement that's similar to what you've shown in Engage, how easy is that to add to their current build?
Thanks, Claudine. Yeah, I when I read that question afterwards, it clicked differently for me that it might be registering differently for existing SmartSimple users. So if you are an existing SmartSimple client and you're utilizing the platform, all the things that we've been talking about and that I've shown today, all of those are capable within your instance of the platform as well. So it's just a matter of configuring those solutions. So another module for tracking goals, being able to configure that within your instance, and then being able to align it to the other things that you're tracking already. So if you're already tracking your granting, then maybe you want to align your grants to your specific goals. Then we can create that relationship. And similarly, when we talk about the outcomes tracking or things like that, those are also just additional features or tools or fields or configured setups that we can work with you on to be able to build that out within your environment. And if that's something that you're interested in, please reach out to us. And my team from a platform solution standpoint would be happy to give you some ideas on how we could incorporate that within your existing instance.
Right, thank you, Dan. So we still have time for a few more questions. Oh, here you go. Dan, you got this one?
Have you worked with examples of tracking goals of building capacity at the partners you work with that don't have easy numerical metrics to collect the progress? How did you handle this? Jim, do you have any examples? I'll see if I can.
Not any specific examples with what we'll call those more intangible aspects of measurement or outcome. What we've seen is a more heavier reliance on some of the activities that may be aligned to a specific cause area or goal, and then leveraging the goal framework within Engage as a way to kind of display or manage that. So that's one of the strategies to kind of begin to tie things into a specific area of impact or cause without having the more specific level of detail around direct levels of impact.
Yeah, and I think in terms of when you talk about building capacity, we're also talking about with your nonprofit partners, A lot of that goes to things like general operating funding and things, where you're really trying to be able to help them scale up. I think those are going to be unique cases like you're kind of alluding to. They're not necessarily specific outcomes that are occurring, but I think you could utilize different mechanisms for kind of showing that growth in capacity based on, the number of staff they've been able to add or the amount of additional square footage they've been able to support, which then could then be translated into later on when you could even identify, if it's an organization that's serving people, then you could show how many people they've served in the earlier phase versus how many people they're able to serve today or in the future as they continue to report to you based on how you contributed to building that capacity and scaling that organization. But I think it would really kind of depend again on what you want to report on within that space. So is it, that they added additional staff? Is that important to you? Or is it based on, again, the outcomes that organization was able to provide as a part of their services? And so I think if you're able to identify that and then identify what it is you want to measure as a result, then whether it's us or, we work with a lot of different consultants within this space too that have a ton of expertise in helping you identify that and measure it. Those are types of relationships we're happy to put you in touch with as well.
Thanks, Dan. We have another question here. Is there a way to show the dashboard of those metrics in our organization website with users without the users logging into the system?
So showing the dashboards externally, is that what the question was, Claudia?
I believe so. There you go. Yes, Minor said yes.
Okay, so yes, and I'll actually show you a couple of examples for other clients that have sort of shown that data publicly. So let me just jump to a couple. So this is an organization in Ontario, Canada, where they are taking that sort of geo-mapping perspective, that impact map, and then being able to display it on their public website. And they're including different, filters to be able to filter in on certain areas, view certain locations, show data related to those projects so that you can see data as you click in to those specific projects within their website. Another example, very different, use case, but an organization in Ireland, the Marine Institute in Ireland, which is a sort of research funding organization. They use the SmartSimple platform, and they are tracking all of their research funding related to that within the system. And on their public website, they present all of that data related to everything they want to present publicly and include different filters so that people can search by specific values and key in on specific records and information that they want to learn about in what the organization is providing. So you can present really any data from within the platform externally and publicly without having somebody have to log in to be able to interact with it. A number of these require sort of custom, work and custom development to be able to do that, but the capabilities are all there, and we have the aspects and functionality within the platform to support what we call internet-enabled reporting. So that even on the really small scale level, you can use internet-enabled reporting within the SmartSimple platform to just reference things and update them on your public website, like how many volunteer hours your organization has contributed this year, or how many dollars your employees have donated this year. So some really simple values. Those can be referenced and presented on your website as well, and could be updated in essentially real time, so that you can really keep those things public facing, update people accordingly, but you don't have to work with your web teams to be able to update those on periodic basis. And you can keep them even more accurate rather than just saying we've contributed over 10,000 hours this year. You can really cue in on the specific values that you want to show. So it's regardless of the use case and the information you want to display, whether it's actual reporting of data, presenting maps, all of those are different opportunities where you can take sort of that dashboard or data presentation outside of the system and show it within a public environment as well. Well, we appreciate everybody's time today. This is, as we sort of started at the beginning and saying this is a big conversation and complex, and there's a lot of different variables involved. And hopefully we were able to give you some ideas of how you can utilize impact measurement, tracking those outcomes, relaying those via stories to be able to inspire your users or your donors or whatever that may be. And if you do have questions, if you want to learn more, you are certainly welcome to reach out to us at SmartSimple or at America's Charities. We are closely partnered and aligned to be able to work within this space and be able to provide organizations a holistic solution to be able to help you manage all of your CSR efforts. So if you want to learn more, if you have further questions for us, feel free to reach out, and we hope to be able to talk with more of you soon.
Dan, thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Jim.